What's good, everybody? My guest today is Tracy Sestilli, three-time Chief Marketing Officer, now Chief Revenue Officer of Intellimize, which is an AI experience optimization platform that was recently acquired by Webflow, which means she's now impacted two successful exits in her career. I always love having go-to-market leaders who have had exits on their resume. Tracy, welcome to the Goats of Growth.
Thanks, Jay. Thank you so much for having me.
So tell me a little bit about what we just ended there with, which is Intellimize, your role as the CRO, and what was the I don't know if I want to use the word impetus, but what was the, I guess, catalyst for the acquisition there?
Well, I mean, we showed a lot of growth over the past year, so I think that was definitely a catalyst for the acquisition. The AI is stellar, and I think it is better in a larger suite. Um, it's funny. I never woke up in the morning in my career and said, I want to be CRO, like ever. But the position presented itself and the opportunity, and we were in between sales leaders, and my CEO said, hey, how would you like to do that? And, I thought about it. I didn't say yes immediately just because, you're carrying half the bag. Right, in marketing, and then now you're going to carry the whole bag, being CRO and running both teams. And I think it's a scary, prospect for people that are not used to that. And I really wasn't sure what to expect, but I think it was a really fun challenge, and I had a really great time in doing it. Did it for just under a year, but just a lot of fun, and I learned a lot too. Like, I didn't know it. I have sold things in the past, but I had never sold SaaS, and so that was really fun.
Tell me, when you say you said you never woke up in your career wanting to be a CRO. What was it on the outside looking in that you were like, I don't want that role?
I think in the marketing world, we just marketers don't want to report into a sales leader. And there's just always, the sales and marketing sort of, going challenges with, alignment and things like that. I've never really had that experience actually in any of my marketing roles. I've always gotten along really well with the sales leaders, but I just never, it's not as, I guess I hate to say it, but it just didn't seem exciting. To me, I like to exercise the creative part of my brain, and I just didn't think there'd be any creativity in sales. And so I never really thought that was like a career step for me. But yet here I am.
So let me ask you this, because you just bring up an interesting thought, which is, do you think that there is a need for more creativity at the CRO level? In other words, to be thinking differently, because somebody like you who's come at it from a lot different angle and perspective than a lot of the CROs that I interview, where they have come up through, I guess, traditional sales. And from your perspective, looking at the CRO role, I'm hearing you say because the CRO role ultimately isn't just sales, right? It's supposed to be the chief revenue officer, which means that there are multiple functions, but the perception is exactly that. Do you think that the organization has benefited from your marketing mind to moving to the CRO role? Number one, I'm guessing you're going to say yes to that, but more broadly, do you think that companies can benefit from someone who has come up from marketing? And if so, tell me why. What are some of the things that marketing brings that maybe somebody who came up through sales does not bring to the table?
This is such a contentious issue on LinkedIn right now. Over the past few weeks, I've read multiple points of view on both sides of whether or not a CMO would make a good CRO and who makes a good CRO. And I think a lot of it has to do with your background. I think if you are a CMO and you came up through demand gen operations, then you have a much, much better understanding of how everything works, the funnel, tracking everything, operationalizing it. You understand sort of the needs that sales has, even though you may have never done it. And I think that it just poises a marketer in a better position. The other arguments that I've heard that are somewhat, some are true, some are not. Like one person said that experienced salespeople will never want to work for a marketer because they want to work for experienced salespeople. And I think that that's true. I think that that's one of the challenges that a CMO has when stepping into a CRO role. Is sort of just proving it out. I've actually just spoken to a few people that are actually about to make the transition from CMO to CRO, and a lot of them had questions about, what are some of the challenges you can expect, in doing that. And I think one of the major challenges is if you're inheriting a sales team and how they're going to perceive you. And I think level setting is super helpful, but also, one of my suggestions and one of the things that I did was I put myself in the sales rotation for a small territory, business that if we won it or lost it, like it wouldn't have really made a huge difference in the grand scheme of things, but just to give myself the experience. And I closed a handful of deals during my time there. But the thing that really won the existing salespeople over was getting through a quarter end and a year end close with them, and that's when it really showed that I understood them and I supported them, and they hit their numbers, and everybody's making money and everybody's happy. But on the CRO perspective, I think a lot of people think that sales is close to the customer and they understand the pain points and they understand the ICP the best, and that's why they make good CROs. And I do think that salespeople do make very good CROs. I just think that one of the misconceptions is that I actually think the marketer knows more about the market and the industry of what they're going after sooner and more deeply than a sales executive. It's true, and this is true for whether you're in sales or marketing. One of the jobs is to go and listen to the voice of the customer. But beyond listening to your customers and your former customers, you also have to just poll people that are not even your customers, like to understand like what people are looking for. I think marketers are a bit more in tune with just the industry, like the SaaS crash that happened. We knew it was happening before it happened. I think we knew it was happening before sales knew it was happening.
Wow.
Um, so I think that it's just things like that that make. I think it makes a CMO very well poised to take over if they come from a demand gen or ops background. I think if you come from a brand background as a CMO, I think you'll have a very difficult time, and I wouldn't recommend it because it would be a miserable experience, to be honest. So.
Oh my gosh, I have so many questions after that. But one thing that comes to mind that I just wrote down, which is, what were the indicators that you saw or other marketers saw when things were not looking all that great anymore in SaaS?
I think a lot of us talked about, doing more with less, right? And, how do you be more strategic instead, and spend less money? Layoffs were very prominent amongst, across all different types of industries in SaaS. Um, there were some, studies that were put out based on like spend, different size companies, how. So I think there were just a lot of things that we just read and talked about, and
Hmm.
mostly in dark social, like private conversations, that sort of thing, which I think is difficult because sales doesn't really have access to that. I mean, they have probably their own network, but it's kind of what other people are hearing, and I'm not really quite sure. I mean, I've been in some of these sales communities. I haven't really seen that level of depth of what's being spent on.
It's a little bit of an echo chamber, right? Is what you would, yeah, for sure. And I think on that side too is there's no, to your point, there's not data. It's just kind of gut checking and what are you feeling and what are you seeing, but there's not really any real digging and information gathering, I guess, if you will. It's funny, as I'm hearing you talk about the role of a CRO and how salespeople may not respect a CRO that came up through marketing. And then I'm listening and then I'm thinking back to the conversation in the episode that I did with Jaco van der Kooi from Winning by Design, and actually some of the stuff that Sam Jacobs has posted recently from Pavilion, and how the role of the CRO has to evolve, because one of the things that Jaco is saying is that SaaS has lost go-to-market fit. And he was talking about how CAC is out of whack and just all of those things, right? Sales cycles are longer. And where in 2021, Sam Jacobs calls it like the unicorn CRO. And
Oh,
now,
and
of
the
course,
donkey.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
I
So
think
now
I
that
read
now it's the donkey unicorn in
that.
2024, and how they have to be more focused on profitable, efficient growth. And I wonder if the this is something that I'm just constantly thinking about right now from the outside. If that profile should change, right? Like as a recruiter, like I'm looking at it like, well, where is the most success going to come from? And I think a lot of failure comes from misprofiling a role. In other words, thinking that you need somebody, and this is the profile that you've always had, or this is what you think you need, and realize you don't have it. And so you have a CRO. In my perspective, they're strategic, they're cross-functional. They are not just thinking about sales, they're thinking about marketing, they're thinking about product, they're thinking about other things. Whereas when I hear you say salespeople aren't necessarily going to be respectful or respect somebody that comes up from marketing, because maybe they're only that person, they only want that CRO to only be thinking about sales, and they should be thinking about the company more holistically, right? So I don't know, I guess there's not a question in there, but I'm just curious to get like your thoughts on, well, no, here's the question. Should CROs be more analytical and strategic than they have been historically? Maybe growth at all costs, they can get away with it, but now maybe you can't.
I mean, yes, and I think that there are a lot of CROs out there that are. I think regardless, when you're in charge of revenue, it's a team sport, right? So you have to sort of look at it holistically, regardless of where you came from. If you're going to manage and the entire revenue for the whole company, you're working cross functionally, not only with sales and marketing, but with customer success, with product, even maybe with engineering, depending upon what kind of product that you're selling. And all of those things have to work in unison and be very well synced, and communication has to be there so that everything works, right? Um, from pre-sale to sale to post-sale, right? And then to upsell. So there's just, and cross-sell, there's all these things that happen, and it involves all of those teams. And just because I think there's this like old school thinking of like, well, sales is just out there for, they just sell it and then they pass it along and they're done. But in a
Mm-hmm.
lot of organizations, sometimes sales holds on to the account for 6 months or 9 months or a year, and then it gets passed off for upsell opportunity. Some companies pass it off right away, and I think it just depends, right, on what your business is. But I think in this day and age, I think you have to be analytical. You have to be able to forecast properly, which is why I said, like, if you have an operations or demand gen background, you're used to forecasting your marketing, your MQL, your leads, right? You have a budget. You need to stretch it across the quarter. You need to make sure that you have an even, steady flow of MQLs coming in at all times. Or if you're doing ABM and you're looking at MQAs, it's the same thing, right? The steady flow. So it's a lot easier to do forecasting and analysis if you have an ops background or a demand gen background. And I think as CROs, I think if you have a sales background, you're used to forecasting, right? Like, you know that you need to do so many deals to hit a number. And so I wish people would stop looking at it as like, who makes a better CRO, somebody from sales or somebody from marketing. It's really like, what's your background? What's your skill set? What are your talents? And what do you bring to the table? I mean, I think as a marketer, I came to the table with an ops background. I spent 15 years in ops before I switched my career over to marketing. And, there are very few people that have done that, right? It's because it's not the same um, part of your brain, right?
Mm-hmm.
There's this very analytical side. And then, I have this huge creative side of me that it was just dying to get out. And then, I got to marry it inside of marketing. And I will say that my ops background has served me very, very well through my marketing career. And this is why I love that course by Yako, Winning by Design, the revenue architecture course. I love that. It's like, you know really understanding like how to set up and get what you need out of your data to be able to bring it full circle so that everybody is benefiting, right? And I think you can do that whether you came from sales or you came from marketing. So I think that that's sort of, that's where I'd like to see people get to and eventually.
Well, here's okay. So here's my take on that, which is I feel like if you're going to run the revenue organization and many functions are going to be rolling up to you, to me, the best profile, call it whatever you want, call it sales, call it marketing, whatever. The person or the people that have touched more functions than not, I think ultimately, like you have, especially coming up through operations and then going into marketing and now sales, and to take the initiative to actually handle a territory. I think that because beyond just a conversation as to whether or not I can assess someone's ability to do this, like they've literally been in multiple roles, they've actually done it, and there's should be data or some just track record of actually being able to discuss that in real life situations and not just this is what I would do. So, anyways, that's just from what I can hear. So, let me ask you this. I've been looking at your profile. Obviously, you've scaled teams, right? You scaled revenues from 25 million to 75 million, from 5 million to 35 million, and all that stuff, right? I'm always curious about because everybody can hear the headline and say, "Oh wow, she's so smart! Oh my gosh, she's so lucky she did that, right?" But I mean, like, "Oh, what great timing or whatever," right? There's just all kinds of reasons, but I like to like sort of like dig into it. So let me just actually I'll put it in sort of like almost like a case study scenario, right? Because I just had this with somebody who's looking for a revenue leader at one of my companies. $5 million, I think it's $6 million in revenue company. Was growing, raised money in 2018, just an A round, was growing at 25% year over year until basically until 2023. Dropped down to 5% year over year. Want to get back, obviously, up to 25% year over year the next year or two. And frankly, they're trying to position themselves for a strategic acquisition. Let's say, for instance, if you were advising that company, like where would you begin in terms of the questions that you would ask to get to where to start fixing it, I guess, if you will, right? In other words, because I know there's a lot of questions that need to be asked there, but where does your mind initially go in terms of what you're trying to figure out with that company?
Is it a PLG company or sales led?
Sales led.
Yeah, I mean, I data is your friend, and I am a huge fan of looking at the data to sort of see what direction it points to. Um, Typically, if there's a loss, there's a reason for the loss. Ideally, you're tracking close loss reasons in your database somewhere. Otherwise, it's going to be a painful exercise to go through and listen to all those calls. Um, I think to advise on how to move forward, I mean, really look at like why are they losing? Could be a pricing issue. It could be an ICP issue. It could be a geo issue. It could be a feature or something in their product or service. So ideally, the data in the system should tell you and point to why that is. It's rarely when that happens. It's rarely the sales team's fault. Like they're salespeople. They're not miracle workers.
Right.
If the product is missing a feature, or if it's the wrong ICP, or the price is too high, there's nothing that the salesperson can really do to fix that.
Mm.
And because they usually don't have the authority to lower the price or obviously create a feature. But that feedback loop with product and with marketing, and even with success is really helpful in terms of figuring out, you know, how to move forward. A lot of the data should be in the CRM, although, I've worked at most companies where the data is just usually a mess. And I think normalizing that data initially and cleaning it up a little bit is usually what will get you to the next level.
Well, I was just writing that down. How do you know which data to trust, right? And how much data on either side of that question, I guess, is how much data do you need in order to make an assumption or a hypothesis of, okay, this is what is wrong and this is what we're going to do about it.
Yeah, I don't believe in analysis paralysis, and maybe this is because I have a data analysis and ops background, but I is an example. Many companies, I worked at one company where I wanted to rip out the Salesforce instance and reinstall it because it was such a mess. They had changed the definition of what a good lead was, an MQL was, so many times. And it seemed like it was changing like every 3 to 4 months. And so finally I just decided, well, we're not going to go back that far, but let's actually look at the data that we do have for the last quarter, and let's just draw the line in the sand there. Can we go back another quarter? Sure, we could. How accurate is that data? Probably 50-50, but let's just draw the line in the sand, and then we know that from this day forward, this is how we're doing things, and then moving it forward. I think a lot of people want to go back historically, but businesses and especially startups change so much every quarter as because they're growing and evolving so quickly that there's just you just have to draw the line in the sand somewhere, and then you set up your own rules of like what does qualify as a good lead, as an example, and what are those criteria, and maybe put in stop gaps in your CRM that make fields that are required before a salesperson closes it out, or throws it in the waste bin. So you have some insight and data moving forward, and that's normally how I've done it. You can't fix so much of the past because then you sort of get like buried. But you can sort of say, hey, this is how we're going to do it moving forward, and let's just keep looking forward. I always am it's the same thing about competition. People always are like, this competitor is doing this competitor is doing that. And if you keep looking back and forth, you're getting like whiplash. Just like keep your eye on the prize, there's an end in sight. You know what you're going for, and that's how I've always run things.
So interesting. Can price and ICP be like, I don't know what the word is, like differentiated? In other words, what if you have the right price but you're selling to the wrong customer, or you know what I mean? In other words, like, and if so, which is there? Which do you change? And I'm assuming that's somewhere in the data, but what do you just pick a winner, so to speak? Okay, let's just focus on the ICP and see if we can go up market because the price is not aligned with them, or how do you think about that?
When I first worked at Spark Post, I'll never forget it. We were in a room, and I was like in charge of digital, I think. And the CMO at the time, before I took over, was like, "We're going after marketers." And because I was a technical marketer, technical background, implemented ERP systems, like I said, "What? There's no way a marketer could do this." Like I had it explained to me. I think it's hard. If I think it's hard, like the average person is probably going to think it's hard. And so uh, we wound up changing course and targeting developers, because you did really need to know code to send, it was an email deliverability platform. And we wound up targeting developers for many years thereafter, because that is actually who, while they didn't have the budget, those were the ones that were test driving the product.
Hmm.
They were launching it, and marketers typically will send a technical person to go try out a technical piece of software to evaluate it, and that was huge, right? Because our price point was right, but we were targeting marketers, and marketers would get in there and they would get stuck. And so we gave that feedback also back to the product team, the UI UX team. Looked at it, because with any product, ease of use trumps everything. It does not matter. You could have the greatest piece of software, tool, product on the planet. Ease of use will generate word of mouth, and it will help long term. When I worked at TiVo, the DVR company, this is 20 years ago. I'm going to date myself now, but that DVR could do anything in terms of television. It revolutionized the way we watch television today. We don't want to watch sports or award shows through commercials. We just skip them. We record it ahead of time. Um, that's all people cared about. But it could do so many more things. It had a music component. It was, connected to all different types of, when streaming started coming out. It was a lot of things that TiVo could do, but no one really cared about those things as much as, I mean, the hardcore fans did, but the general public just wanted something that could, was really easy to watch the programs that they loved, and they wouldn't miss a TV show if they weren't married to the network schedule, et cetera. And that was a big deal. And so, ease of use is definitely the reason most brands succeed, even if it's not doesn't have all the bells and whistles, right?
And I'm assuming even if it's not the most, even if it's not the least expensive, in other words, you might pay a little bit more for ease of use and convenience than, right?
Yeah, you could have the cheapest tool, but if it's like hard to use, which a lot of software, you can tell that, especially if it's product led, right? It's very, you can tell when it's created by an engineer. There's a certain look and feel to it that it just isn't. What's the word I'm looking for? Like, it's not digestible. I remember evaluating a CRM for a company. We were looking at new CRMs. The right tool for us at the time, we were an SAP Oracle shop. We should have gone with the SAP CRM, hands down. It would have been a very easy plug and play, super easy. But the customer success team, who was the main user, and the marketing team, they didn't like the SAP interface. It did not look easy to them. It wasn't similar to what they were already using. And they wound up going with another tool. I forget what it was called, maybe Right Now Technologies. I'm not even sure. And because it had a very nice user interface and it was easier to use, right? And so that is hands down always going to win ease of use, because the word of mouth generated by that is like, hey, I use this tool. It's so easy. You do X, Y, Z. And
That's
whether you have to pay a price, a little bit of a premium for it, sometimes you do, but people will pay the little bit of a premium for ease of use, especially if it gives you what you want.
I always do. By the way, I always pay for ease of use. I don't have time to pay for or to waste with tools that I don't understand or that are hard to use. I'll always overpay for ease of use for sure.
Yeah,
You mentioned that you had the right price, but because the ICP was selling to the wrong market, so to speak, right? You needed to be selling to
that's
developers.
correct.
How did you know you had the right price if people weren't buying it? Was it market research that you did with against competitors, or what was it?
There was competitive market research. There was research with customers who didn't buy. So one of the exercises we did was we split up all the clothes lost, and we offered people like $100 gift card to just talk to us for 20, 30 minutes to just ask them why they didn't buy. And price never came up. Um, but I've worked at other companies where, again, the close loss reasons should tell you whether or not it's price or not. Um, and you should be able to figure that out. But there's tools out there that will help you figure out whether or not you're competitively priced. Not everybody has their pricing on their website. Um, there's there's ways to figure that out. But and then there's just there is for certain tools, marketers talk, right? We know how much a tool costs. We've implemented these tools across multiple companies. It's not our first rodeo in doing it. So you kind of have an idea of what you would pay for a tool like that.
Hmm. Let me ask you this. Oh man, all right, hold on. I'm trying to think which one I want to go with there for a second. Actually, hold on. We'll pause on that one. I want to go back to, let's say, for instance, you lower your price
Mm-hmm.
because you know that that's the answer, right? You lower your price because it is too high. Um, does and it hurts your CAC, right? Like, how do you? I mean, and you know that price is the thing. So then, how do you fix lowering the cost to acquire those customers?
So in Telemize, we did lower our pricing after the SaaS crash because it was too high.
Mm-hmm.
It impacted the CAC the first quarter because we had things, marketing is always 3 to 6 months out planned, right? So it was going to impact CAC, but within 6 months, you can reconcile that and rectify it so that you try different strategies and different tactics. Where are those leads coming in the first place? How do you do it for less? Maybe you're getting a lot of quantity, but the quality's not there. So I'd rather have more quality. I'd rather have a lower number of leads with higher quality than a ton of leads that I have to sort through and weed through. I remember one time going to a conference, and it was one of those conferences where it's like 8 conferences in one. And the
Mm-hmm.
guy was like, "Don't worry, I'm going to give you the leads for everything." I'm like, "I don't want the leads for everything. I don't want to put those crap leads in my
right,
CRM systems.
right,
I have to weed through them." Oh my god, no.
right.
So
Um, Why price on websites? What's that all about? Like, why do people? A lot of people do it. Obviously, companies do it, but is that a competitive advantage, and in what way?
I think so because people are going to figure it out anyway. They're going to ask people. The worst thing that could happen to you is someone, like when we lowered our pricing and Intellimise, the first thing I did was put it on the website because I wanted people to know we had this perception in the market that we were complicated, like hard to use, and also the price was too high.
Hmm.
And the ease of use thing I could work through. We made a lot of videos, we did webinars, we had reviews on review sites that sort of like mitigated that. Um, and we started talking about it differently on our website. But the pricing was like, how do you fix people that have been here, you know, came through the funnel 3, 6, 9 months, maybe even a year ago, and they think that you're so expensive. And how do you fix that? And I think putting it out on the site is a great way of doing that.
Hmm.
Um, the transparency there, people are going to ask around anyways. You also have companies like Vendor, which I call the SaaS killer. Like, they come in and they're like, well, you sold it to so and so for X, and there's a lot of ethical things around that. But it's like, well, hey, here's our price. It's on the website. We're really transparent about it, and I think that really helps mitigate it. And then, of course, you have to like advertise it and send out emails and things like that, and reach back out to the folks that previously said no because of price, and you run your closed loss reports for that. But to
Hmm.
me, that's it's a great way of saying that, fixing that perception.
Can you, I guess, you were talking about how CAC can be, what you lose there for CAC can be sort of recovered in a period of time, 6 months, call it or whatever. Can you also, if you improve your LTV, um, make up for it in that way too, as well, in terms of customers either staying longer, maybe buying more stuff, even though your CAC may have been raised? In other words, would that be helpful, I guess, if you will, or
It would
is
be
it a
helpful.
strategy?
It would be helpful. I think it would depend. It depends on your product, right? Like if you're constantly innovating and adding new features, then the LTV could increase, and that could ultimately help you.
Mm,
But I think it would take a little bit of time to sort of realize that benefit over time.
got it.
Yeah.
Going from, I don't know, take a benchmark, going from 25 million to 75 million, or 5 million to 33 million. Actually, I have two questions. Number one, which is harder to do in terms of operationally, I guess, if you will, and what levers did you pull that where you saw the biggest impact, I guess, the biggest success?
I've always found that going from like 0 to 50 million is usually the easiest. And I think once you hit 50 million and above, it's where it gets harder.
Mm,
Um, and then when you get above 100 million, it's a different animal. So to me, I think that the 0 to 50 should be, and especially 0 to 25 should be really, really easy.
mm,
Um, there's, you have to be, I think as a startup, you have to be good in an area. Um, like pick your battle, go be the best in that thing. What I see a lot of startups do is they tend to go, well, we really nailed it in this industry. We're going to expand into this industry. But you didn't really quite nail it because if you did, you'd be at 25 million already. So how do you know, gradually expand without, you know, not conquering your initial thing that you went after. Sometimes it's the wrong thing that you went after. So switching it up is always helpful. But I
mm.
think, like I remember years ago, I was at this company and we were above 50 million, and it was like, we're going to go after fintech. And I remember thinking, oh my God, like, or financial services, sorry, not even fintech, which is even worse. So financial services is like banking, right? And I'm like, oh my God, these are 9 to 18 month lead cycles to get through these companies. And we have so many gaps in our content and our marketing. And it was like, well, we're going to do it like this quarter coming up. And I'm like, we're not going to succeed in that thing. So we just started gradually building up our muscle for financial services while still like really focusing on the Martech and the SaaS that we really had a handle in, and that's where our footprint was. And because there was no way we were going to make that right. And 9 months to a year later, we started seeing financial services start to pick up, but it took a long time, right? So I think figuring out like where your track is and doing that well is definitely something that I think a lot of startups get dazzled by the expansion. Like for a while there, everybody was like PLG, launch PLG. PLG is not a silver bullet. It's also very hard to do unless you've done it. And your product is super easy to use. It's super intuitive. It will not be a silver bullet. And I think there's a lot that goes into PLG. I've done it twice, and there's a lot of things that people just don't think about. But you hear from an investor or you hear from another CEO friend, it's like, you should do PLG. And then all of a sudden it's like, we should do PLG. And you really have to sort of work through, should you really do PLG right now? Is that really the answer? Because sometimes the answer can be maybe expanding into a new geo, right? Like maybe going into Europe, or maybe putting out, differentiating your product or service, like having multiple products, like creating instead of or feature flagging things. There's
Mm-hmm.
lots of things that you can do to increase your ASP. You can charge for, seats, or, SSO or things like that, right? So many things. So I think there's lots of ways to do it, but I often see startups make a mistake of doing that, and it's painful for everybody, right? The marketer, the sales team, because you're trying to break into new territory. You don't have any case studies, you don't have any marketing, you have no content. It's just it becomes it takes a little bit of while. Just can't turn marketing on like that. I think a lot of people are like, well, we just want to go after this industry. It takes a lot to do that, right? It takes some planning. You have to figure out where your gaps are. Is it the right TAM? What is the ICP? What's the SAM, et cetera? So
What about you mentioned that a lot of people, when they think about PLG, they don't think about what they should be thinking about, I guess, right? There's a lot to consider. What are some of the things that they should consider that they're not considering typically?
the barrier to entry needs to be really low, but not so low that you have no data about that person. So depending upon like if you have an app in an app store, or if it's signing up on your website, you have to have their email address and their name, right? The rest of that data you can usually backfill with, you know, uh, other software tools to enrich that data, but at a minimum, you need that. And then once they get in, you should have it should be very easy, like what the steps are to take to do whatever it is that your product offers. And whether you do that through, inside the app and your work with the product team to figure out what those steps are. I've seen it where some products have, steps 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. This is how you get started, kind of thing. And then, it points you to exactly where you need to go. Like some experiences are really, really great. And then others are not so great. Um, and the person gets lost and then they drop off. And then when you look at usage data for your product and you look across, well, where did they drop off? Did they implement this feature? Did they try this? Did they do that? If they didn't get started, there's a reason they didn't get started. It wasn't easy. And if it's not easy, you will have drop off every single time. You certainly won't have word of mouth, and yet it'll probably be negative word of mouth. Like, hey, I tried it, it was really hard.
And then even to fill the top of the funnel there, it's a different skill set, right? Because that's all about brand and demand, right? In other words, it's creating the brand and then driving the demand so that they can, frankly, come to the website, put in their email address for in exchange for this wonderful thing that they're going to get, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, there's a lot of PLG acquisition is can be done very cheaply if
Mm.
the messaging is right and the value prop is there. And then when they get in, you know, you start to build this community, right, of people that are like, oh, I tried it. This is so cool. It's awesome. Let me try it again. Tell my friends, and it just works. But when you have hurdles for the user, then it becomes a bit more difficult, and you have to spend more money on your acquisition funnel. And so that's where working with product very closely can really, I mean, giving that feedback loop between marketing and product and what's working and what's not is really, really important as companies get started.
And conversely, if your messaging is, let's say the product is fantastic, but the messaging, well, you wouldn't have
Oh
that
yeah,
much.
the messaging's terrible.
Yeah, exactly. The messaging is terrible, right? Although obviously, if your product, and then if a lot of people aren't using your product, it's hard to actually get enough maybe data and feedback to know if your product is okay. A couple more questions, and then we'll go to the fun part, the rapid fire five, and the bonus question. But
A bonus question.
the unknown bonus question. Let me ask you this: just going back to something you said earlier about dominating your market or industry before going adjacent or to another domain, I guess. How do you know? In other words, is there data that satisfies Tracy Sestili that says you've nailed it? Let's move over here now.
I mean, what's your market share in that industry? It should be pretty high. Should be above 50%. I'd say then you could feel like you've nailed it, and you have a flywheel going there, right? Uh, and then you can take maybe some of the best practices that you learn there and apply it to another industry or another path. But you know, there's there's a lot to be said for to know whether or not you've dominated a specific industry, right? It's not only do you need to know if you have the market share, but like people will be talking about it. You will come up in conversation. You're part of the RFP process, right? Um, you're so inundated with RFPs that you can't even keep up. Like that. That's market domination. Um, you don't have to get that far, but you need a good saturation in the market, I think, to really decide, well, okay, well, now we've done this well. Because the first few years, most companies are just figuring out their product market fit anyway, so they're not going to nail it right out of the gate. Very few do.
Mm,
And product market fit is it is key for success, right? Like you could have the best product. Your messaging could be terrible. There's so many things that can go wrong, even if you do have product market fit, right? So when you imagine if you have all the right recipe, but you don't have product market fit, it's like you're baking a cake and the person is a diabetic. So, right, like
right, you're right.
it's like, well, that's great, but it's just not the right time for it.
What about you mentioned? Okay, so you mentioned market share above 50%. Does unit economics come into that equation at all, or not, as it pertains to scaling, or it doesn't matter because you're winning anyways?
Yes, eventually unit economics will always come into play, right?
Yeah.
I think in the beginning, you are just looking to get as much saturation as possible.
Hmm.
Um, you can always, I mean, obviously the best companies do it smartly as they grow, right? So a lot of companies, the best ones are smart about how they scale. They have, the unit economics are all in place. They do everything slowly and gradually, and they start to tick up. I've also seen companies be super successful. They're like, well, you know what? We're just going to just saturate the market and we'll worry about the economics later. And then they do have to right size it and fix it, right, with price changes or uh, adjustments in their marketing, et cetera. But yeah, for sure.
Got it. Okay. Sorry. Let
There's
me just ask
definitely an
one.
ideal state, right? But
Yeah.
it
Right.
hardly ever works out that way.
Yeah. For sure. Actually, sorry. One other question, then we'll get to the rapid fire five. This goes back to all the way back to the beginning. A question that I wanted to ask that I didn't ask, um, which is, as a CMO, did you have P&L responsibility, and and do you think that should be a prerequisite for someone to get into that CRO role?
Yes, I had it. I mean, you do need to know a little bit about finance, but I don't think it needs to necessarily be a prerequisite. I think you can learn finance. You can learn the P&L. Uh, I wouldn't rule somebody out for CRO just because they didn't have that. Because oftentimes CMOs and CROs are usually besties with finance, and if you're not, you should be, because they are going to help you, figure out like, is your forecast accurate? What do you need to do? What's your reverse funnel look like? How much money do you have to spend for acquisition? The comp plans, right? There's a lot of things that when you're besties with your finance person, you it's super helpful, and there's a mutual trust there, right? I think you need to trust your finance person. So do I think it's a prerequisite? No. Is it helpful? Absolutely, of course. But
Yeah.
I don't think it needs to necessarily be a prerequisite for either role. But I do think it's definitely helpful.
Fantastic. All right. You ready for the aforementioned fun part? The
Oh
rapid,
yes, let's go.
the rapid fire five. All right. Here we go. First question. What motivates you?
In work, I assume this is,
Work,
or
life,
anything.
whatever. Doesn't matter.
Yeah,
It's pretty
I
open.
think just doing interesting work that makes an impact, that gives like a sense of accomplishment. Like in my personal life, if I usually like have a list of things I'm going to do for the day. If I get to check, the majority of them off, I feel pretty good about it. There's no pressure to check them all off because my list is relatively long. But when I'm working, I think just I'm really motivated when I get to do something that is super interesting, creative, and that can make an impact. So to me, that's what motivates me.
Love it. Name a big goal you have right now, and when would you like to accomplish it, personal or professional?
My big goal right now is to complete a 28-day wall Pilates challenge. I just got into it, and so I'm trying to see if I can do that. We'll see what happens. I'm on day
What?
3.
What? There you go. So wait, let me
25
ask
more to
you.
go.
There you go. But wait, what is it? A wall Pilates challenge?
Wall Pilates, yeah. So it's Pilates, but without the reformer, and you do it mostly on the wall or the mat.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, we'll
But
see.
so I'm assuming you've done Pilates before, though. This isn't just like get off the couch and do Pilates, right? For 25
Yeah, I have done reformer Pilates before, but I've never actually done wall
wall
Pilates.
Pilates.
So this is interesting. It's a lot of using your own weight and stuff. So your own body weight.
I'm gonna hit you up in 25 days to check in with you to see how you're doing.
Okay.
I encourage the audience to too, by the way. What's your most preferred way to learn new information to stay sharp?
Hmm. I do a lot of reading on LinkedIn, but I also and Medium articles. I do a lot of reading of those because they tend to be less biased. But I also listen to podcasts of people that I find interesting. I am part of the Chief Network. I listen to a lot of their podcasts, and then some other randos that I listen to. But that's mostly what I'm listening to.
Cool. Make sure you add this one to the favorites
I
to
will
your
definitely add the
yeah.
goats of Gura to my favorite
Follow it.
list.
Yeah, go listen to Yako. Which
I did
here's a,
listen to his. It was actually quite good. I liked it a lot.
oh,
Yeah.
cool, good, fantastic. Unfortunately, we lost the ending, but that's okay.
Yeah.
Um, what's your? I don't know if this one was actually. I got to update my automation here because I don't think you saw this one, but I'm going to ask it anyways. Who is your favorite character of all time?
Character?
Could be in anything, fact, fiction. Could be the character down the street from your house. Like, who's the person that's like it just comes to mind and says, "I love that character."
Gene Wilder in the original Willy Wonka is my favorite character of all time. It's clever, it's mysterious, it's funny, it's just, yeah. And it's, I just love that, his character
Yeah,
there.
can never go wrong with Gene Wilder, anyways.
No.
Um, what's your favorite thing to do when you aren't working? Last one.
Baking, I think. I find it very cathartic. I used to work in a bakery for 10 years when I was younger. I learned how to decorate cakes and did wedding cakes, all sorts of things. But there's something about like working with like the dough and just, I don't know, I find it super cathartic. And then you definitely have like a sense of accomplishment when you're done because you have this final thing and you can look at it and you can touch it and you can eat it.
Yeah.
So it's good.
Yes. Yes. Sometimes I do get envious of people who have jobs like that. Like you paint a fence, it dries, it looks beautiful, you're done.
Yeah,
As opposed to, as opposed to
exactly.
what we do with information and whatever. I don't know. I feel like the candidate search is never done either, but it's a different story. Okay. Here comes a bonus question that you aren't aware of, which is okay. This is a good one. Um, I don't know if Yako asked this one or not. No, he couldn't have because we didn't hear it. What challenges do you face when running a sales team in 2024?
Hmm.
I guess that'll be unique challenges, maybe, I guess, from 2021 or 2022 and so forth. But what do you think?
I think if you're running a sales team in 2024, I think that the challenges that are hitting CROs right now is sort of um, being able to tie it all together. This sort of, you know, this sort of doing more with less, but it's more like instead of, I think the answers always used to be like, well, we're just going to hire people and keep hiring, but you have to have the demand there to do it. And so I think figuring out how to do that, um, and how to do it efficiently is
Mm,
probably going to be a challenge in 2024 because you still want to grow, but you don't want to, um, you know, have what I call go to market bloat, which is like too many people, too much software, and then you sort of become underwater at the end. So I think that's going to be a challenge for 2024 because the market is still not fully bounced back yet, and I think that there is a fine balance between hiring and tech and getting that together.
I like your inferred optimism when you said it hasn't fully bounced back yet,
Yeah,
presuming
it
that it.
will. I've been saying this for a year, over a year now. I believe that after the election, and I not to get political, but I do think that that will change things because if you read, the economists are, have their bets, they're hedging their bets. They kind of think of where the economy's going. The inflation was, slightly down a little bit in April.
Mm,
So I do think that there is definitely hope at the end of this tunnel. And it can't stay like this forever. So I do think that the election will play a big part in the overall economy and in tech. So I'm a big believer in that.
yeah, more certain one way or the other, depending on whether you
Yeah,
agree or disagree with the
it
policies.
does. Yeah,
It's
it doesn't exactly.
right,
Like, the fact is, we will have an election in November, and it
right.
will change the tides one way or the other.
Yeah,
So
yeah, there will be a president, and that we know. And then to your point, right? It's really about like the old adage, right? Not life is about 90% of how you react to it, as opposed to just sort of like what happens to you, right? So
that's right. Yeah,
yeah,
exactly.
yep,
How will you react to the change, and which
yep,
way will it go? Who knows? I don't know.
yep. That's right. Yep, that's right. Okay, so here's your question to ask the next guest. What question would you like for me to ask the next guest from you?
I have two, and I'll let you choose which one you ask. Okay.
Okay.
So the
Yeah.
first one I am curious about is, do you think AI should be regulated?
Okay.
And then the second one I think is, if you could have any expert in a room for 30 minutes, who would it be?
Ooh, those are tough ones to decide. Do you think AI should be regulated? And if you could have an expert in the room for 30 minutes, who would it be?
Yeah.
Oh, those are good
And you
ones.
talk to a lot of people, so I'm curious, like, if you could talk to an expert for 30 minutes in a room, like, who would that be for you?
Oh, for me, it's easy, but it's not going to be like a business. It's going to be a business slash entertainment person, which would be Sean Carter, also known as
Oh,
Jay Z.
Jay-Z.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Because I respect him as an artist and even probably more so as someone who parlayed that into an empire on the business side.
Yeah.
And yeah, for me, no doubt that's who it would be.
Yeah. Have you read his book?
Decoded.
Yeah, yeah.
I have two of them behind me. I have a white version and a black version. Why do you have it? Have you read it?
Well, so funny, quick story. This is many years ago when Oprah did her Last Favorite Things episode. I was on it, and as a result, I'm also a meme on your iPhone. If you look up and you try to insert a meme to a text called "fangirl," like you'll see it. But
Okay.
anyway, she gave away that book that year, and that was the book. And so, yeah, I have read it. So anyway, I just thought that's so funny because that's your guy. Um, but he's super impressive. I think also Oprah's impressive too in terms of like, whether you agree with her or not.
Mm-hmm.
She is a self-made billionaire, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
she really came up from the bottom. And I
Yes.
think that all those stories are, she didn't come from money. There are a lot of people that are self-made, but they came from money.
Yes.
And those people are not as impressive,
Yes.
even though it is a lot of work. And but when you
Mm-hmm.
sort of had an easy path growing up,
Mm-hmm.
um, there's sort of it's less. I call those the silver spoon track kids. It's like, well, that's great. You
Yeah.
went to Harvard. Oh, I'm so sorry.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, for
But
sure.
for those that really did not,
Mm-hmm.
I think that it's just like, wow, look at that person go, and anything's possible, right? It sort of shows you and proves that out. So that's why I think that's impressive.
Born on, yeah, I completely agree. Born on third, or born at home plate, have to bat your way all the way around to come home, right? And
Yep.
yeah, for sure. Yep, I
Oh, I
love it.
like that analogy a lot. Yeah,
Yeah, for sure. Well, we were talking about baseball before we got on, so there you
that's true.
go. So, the game tonight. Um, Tracy Sestilli, let me ask you this: how can people reach out to you to say thank you? Perhaps, I don't know, ask any questions that I didn't ask, all that wonderful stuff.
Oh, I'm always available on LinkedIn. I mean, even people can DM me. I mean, this is funny. When I did this post a couple weeks ago on going from CMO to CRO, I had people reach out who were interested in understanding a little bit more about that, and I'm happy to talk about it. I think it's an interesting, but I'll talk about anything. I mean, I'm an open book. I don't believe in hoarding knowledge. It's like just share it. Everybody benefits from it. I think it was Sam. I may have seen a webinar that Sam did, which was like really about like execution is better than the idea. Sam Jacobs.
Mm,
It's like it is, right? Because you can have all the ideas in the world, but executing it, every situation is unique. You could work for the same types of companies. They could sell the same thing, and your strategy is going to be slightly different, and how you execute is going to be slightly different for every single one of those. There's no like, oh, this is the blueprint and repeat. The blueprint is a good way to like which way is the wind blowing, but it's always going to be different. And I think that is, that's why I'm all about sharing knowledge. There's really no secrets. You want my strategy? Here's my strategy. I mean, it's not. You'll still have to execute my strategy, so it really won't make a difference. So,
I,
kind of how I feel about things.
I absolutely love that for sure. Um, Tracy Sestilli, thanks for coming on the Goats of Growth. This was awesome.
Thanks so much, Jay. This was a lot of fun. I appreciate you.
Absolutely. Goodbye, everybody. Don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review, and follow up with Tracy to find out how she's doing in her wall Pilates and all that, all that wonderful stuff. And make sure you tell her you heard her on the Goats of Growth. All right. Goodbye, everybody.